Mayor. Let's bow for a moment. Our Heavenly Father, we know that you're a good Father. We thank you for this day. We thank you for our homes, our families, our friends, and we thank you for the citizens of this wonderful city of Nacogdoches. Father, we pray for and ask that you lift up our local leadership for your blessings. We pray that they would serve with renewed energy to address the needs of our community. May they engage with citizens in positive participation in our community. May each one gladly contribute in any way, whether humble or significant. We pray for unity of purpose so that good strategies and plans may be implemented quickly. Bless the City Council as they meet. In Jesus' name we pray and gladly bless you with praise and honor. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Bowler. Okay, I'm going to gavel us in and call this meeting to order. And if you'd stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we will move into our work session and receive an update, hold discussion, and give staff direction regarding a list of planning studies and strategies to assist the city's planning and economic development efforts. It's the city planner and the city manager, and we'll start with Mr. Canizares.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, new faces at the dais, and it's such a new place to see you all up at the dais the way it used to be, so that's good. We are going to, could you please bring the presentation up? No. There you go. Thank you, sir. We are going to be doing a tag team approach. It's going to be myself and Elena Chafin, your city planner, to talk about just where we are on these planning strategies that we've been working on. Just kind of give you some context where we are. When I started back in August of last year, and one of the things I had done prior to me coming on board was I had requested all the department heads to provide me a resume of themselves, just an organizational chart of their respective departments, along with some of the key issues and initiatives they've been working on, just the top 5 things, issues, projects, etc. And the last thing I asked them to do, just to kind of get context, was what I was walking into to the organization being new, is please provide me just a listing of any of your strategies, studies, initiatives that you've been working on long term, just from a planning perspective. I'd received a lot of information provided to me with resumes along with organizational charts, but quite honestly, when it came to that section of my ask, it was pretty light of what I had received. And when I first started back in August, as I was doing my orientation, working with staff to get familiar with my surroundings, who I was going to be working with, what I was going to get involved with, I just asked that I noticed that as part of their submittal that there was just really not a whole lot provided to me as far as these long-term strategies. And what they told me was, we have some, but some of them are very dated. Some are underway. And so really, quite honestly, they just really didn't feel comfortable providing those to me. So that's where we are. So then as I was getting more familiar with staff, I'd gotten our staff together, our planning folks, our engineering, Larissa Philpott with NEDCO and others, just to kind of convene a meeting with them to try to understand, okay, if we don't have those, then what is it that we need? And so I'd asked them to put together a listing of those kinds of items that we need, just to kind of keep, just from a planning and strategy perspective, what are some of the studies that you all would need in your day-to-day operations and as we look to the long term. And so we staff put together this list that covered a number of things. A few of those things were already underway, but some of those had not been started. So once we put that list together, we came to council back in December of last year to kind of go over these studies, and we had a workshop with council at the time, to go over sort of point by point what were some of the issues and areas that we needed to focus on, or at least that I recommended that we needed to focus on, and then ultimately to try to get direction from the council as to should we proceed or not, or pivot or change direction. And so we promised that we would come back to you the following month, so we came back to you in January, and to make sure that, you know, are we heading in the right direction? And really the areas that we really wanted to focus on were really in two areas. One was the downtown master plan, because it had been a while since it had been done, and also the comprehensive land use plan. It had been done. It had been a while since it had been done. We were under construction with I-69. There was obviously we were in the middle of a pandemic, and so there were a lot of changes that were happening just around on the planning and development side. And so we wanted to make sure that these processes take time. We wanted to make sure that we definitely were moving forward. And so those are really the two areas that we focused on in getting direction for you, because A, the amount of time that it takes, and quite honestly, the other thing, because of the expense. Those aren't small items to procure. And so, and it's an involved process, and so we wanted to make sure that we were going in the right direction. Based on the comments that I had heard from council back in January, you all said, let's proceed forward. And so, so that's where we were headed. And so really the step is to develop a request for qualifications on those processes, so we can then work towards selecting a vendor. We then met with council, again, different council, but we met with council at your retreat in February. And again, just wanted to make sure, are we heading in the right direction? And you all said, please proceed. So at this point, really the two areas that we wanted to make sure that we covered with you, I was downtown, just the results of where we are with the downtown master plan and the comprehensive land use plan, knowing that we have a new mayor, we have a new council member. We just wanted to bring you up to speed, and really ultimately at the end of the presentation is just get direction as to, do you want us to proceed with those projects, yes or no? So with that, I'm going to turn over to Elena. She is going to go through just some of the details of kind of where we are, the why, the scope, what we've done so far, and then at the end, she is going to turn it back over to me, and then I'm going to make some comments about some next steps, what I would recommend we do moving forward. All right?
Good evening, Elena Chapin, City Planner. Thank you, Mario. So like Mario said, I'm just going to go over a couple of the bullet points as to why we're moving forward with these plans, an overview of what the plans are and their purpose and what we've done so far, the pricing, and then I'll kick it back over to Mario. So these planning efforts really are the key to bridging the gap. Do I just? Oh, that would be helpful. Hi, so these planning efforts really are the key to bridging the gap between where Nacogdoches is as a community today and where we want to go in the future. And these plans aren't meant to be static, they're meant to be dynamic, ever-changing guides that fairly reflect the consensus of the opinion of what the community should become over time. And these plans should be kept up to date. They should be reviewed and amended regularly in order to address changing conditions and changing attitudes. The comprehensive plan specifically gives an opportunity for the community to step back and really look at the big picture. And when you're looking at multiple topics over a long time horizon, the community really has a chance to discuss both the compatibilities and any kind of potential conflicts that there might be between land use policies and goals and objectives, and so forth. And so that's why it's so important for this process to have an authentic participatory public engagement process to make sure that when we're establishing those frameworks and guides for public and private investment, it's really reflective of the community priorities as a whole. And so whenever we're looking at these plans, the comprehensive plan was adopted in 2003. It was based on 2000 census demographic data, which included population, age, income, race, and ethnicity. A lot of the economic components were based on the 1997 economic census, including industry, occupation, employment. At that time, the alignment of I-69 was incomplete, and the timing was really uncertain as far as when that construction was going to take place. Also, we've seen some changes at the state level as far as laws regarding annexation and taxing laws, which really changes how the city operates and how we strategically plan for future growth. And we've seen expanded school facilities. The ISD has expanded facilities, which impacts how and where we want to grow. And we've also seen changes in development patterns. Since 2003, we've seen subdivisions, commercial, some redevelopment. And so the development pattern that was established when the plan was adopted is a little bit different than what we see today. So that's one of the reasons why, or that's a few of the reasons why we'd like to move forward with an update to the comprehensive plan. The downtown master plan was completed in 1974, and there's been a couple of plans since then, but none of them have been an overall holistic downtown master plan. We had a heritage development plan that was done in 1998 by Texas A&M, and was really more of like an economic analysis and included some proposals for some open space areas. And then in 2017, we had a streetscape improvements plan, which really was focused on designing for future sidewalks in the central square, but didn't look at land use or retail or provide any kind of market study analysis. And so those are a few of the reasons why we'd like to move forward with the downtown master plan. In this past year, Nacogdoches has seen a lot of change in leadership. We've seen changes with our new city manager, with new superintendent for the ISD, with a new SFA president. So it really provides an opportunity for us to take a step back and really look at things with a fresh set of eyes, and figure out where do we want to go in the future and who do we want to be and how do we get there. So those are just a couple of the reasons why we've selected these studies in particular to go ahead and move forward with quickly. So as far as the scope and proposed plans, the comprehensive plan really is that big picture holistic plan. The process takes anywhere from 12 to 16 months. This helps establish a vision for the future based on current demographic data, existing conditions, and then helps us establish those long-range goals and objectives based on that. It also includes a very detailed implementation strategy, and some of the elements include future land use plan, transportation, parking community facilities, and other plans. This plan specifically, we actually included the development of the proposed I-69 corridor plan. And based on feedback that we got in January, we also included the housing needs assessment to help us better determine where we should focus housing development. The downtown master plan, that will create a vision for downtown. And this will be more design heavy. So it'll review facades, streetscapes, pedestrian access, and it'll provide some recommendations for physical improvements to help increase the efficiency of that area. It'll also provide a market analysis. And again, this plan was last completed in 1974. So what's happened so far? I know Mario gave you a little bit of a history. So like Mario said, we conducted workshops in December of last year and then January of this year, and City Council provided direction for us to move forward with RFQs for the comprehensive plan update in the downtown master plan. We issued those in early March, and then we received submittals of statement of qualifications from those firms, and on March 26th, we received 13 different submittals from different individual firms for the downtown master plan and 10 submittals from individual firms for the comprehensive land use plan update. So far, staff has interviewed 3 finalists for each study. So we selected the top 3 finalists for the comp plan, the top 3 finalists for the downtown plan, and we conducted those interviews last week. So this slide is an overview of all those different plans and studies that we've been talking about with some breakdowns. On the left-hand side, you'll see a column that says funded, and you'll see a check mark for the ones that have been funded, and where it's blank, that means they haven't been funded. And then you'll see a description, the fiscal year for each of those plans, when they're planned to be conducted, and then some more information on staff oversight, and then the estimated begin and completion date. And so if you look at the downtown master plan and comprehensive plan update, those are outlined in red. Those are the items that we're looking for direction to move forward with tonight. And we've updated the pricing, and so if you look at the yellow bars in the middle, you'll see that the city investment total is broken down by year, and then funded and unfunded, and the total city investment over the 3 years is just under $700,000. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mario.
We're going pretty quickly on the slides. I want to make sure we have enough time for questions, because I'm sure there may be a lot. So knowing that there's been a lot of community feedback and discussions about these processes, one of the things that I would recommend, and I visited with you all individually, and we went ahead and started advertising for this, is my suggestion is that we do a public forum on June 8th. It gives us an opportunity to get out in front of the community, talk about the sort of, through this material that we presented tonight, and we can probably expand on that, to be able to share with the community kind of where we've been, kind of the why, what's going on, and how we would proceed with that if given permission to do so. And so we think that would be appropriate to do so on June 8th at the rec center. So we've already started advertising for that, and we'd like to proceed with that. The next piece, because public engagement is so important, if council decides that we would like to proceed with these efforts, my suggestion is that you all appoint two 9-member task forces. And I'm just using 9 because it's somewhat manageable. You don't have such a large group that can become unwieldy as far as just being able to get people to attend, because these are studies that take a lot of time. I mean, these could be easily 7 to 9, sometimes 12 months, could be a year and a half. And so wanting to make sure that people stay engaged. And so I'll give you, for example, and these are just suggestions, and again, you can take it for what they are, or you can make changes if you like, but on the comprehensive land use plan, my suggestion would be is that it be, again, 9-member committee. It would definitely have a beginning and an end. So when it starts, it would start with a council member, a planning and zoning commission member. We would have a representative from SFA, a member from the NEDCO board, and then 5 community members of your choosing, of the council's choosing. For the downtown master plan, again, I would recommend having a city council member, an SFA rep, because of the connections into the university to downtown, plus they also have the Cole Art Center, a historic preservation committee member because of the historic nature of our downtown, a member of the CVB board because of their tie-ins with tourism and other components with the Convention and Visitors Board member, and also 5 members of the community. The thought would be that these folks would work directly with staff and the consultant from the time they start the project in earnest, and they would work through that process the entire time that the process is ongoing. We would have a lot of feedback at the very beginning. Every one of these consultants that have been interviewed, when they look at their timeline as far as the project, each one of them, they have a week or 2 of ramp up, maybe 4 weeks of ramp up period, just kind of get contacts with, get information from staff about demographics and just some of those particular details to get their study going. But really, a majority of the first few weeks of these efforts is community engagement. So the thought would be is that these task force members would be a part of that process from the get-go. If we proceed forward, the thought would be is that we would bring forward a contract for mid-June for you all to approve this contract. I would also recommend that at that same meeting you also begin appointments of these task force this task force for both efforts. We theoretically could kick the project off in July, maybe even August, and then we would proceed through that process. I did add a couple of slides here just to give you an idea of kind of the timeline. It was not in your packet, so I just added these as additional items. I just wanted to give the council kind of an update on kind of just a run-through of what we've done. We've covered this already in the presentation, but again, December the 15th and January 19th, we came to council. You all gave the go-ahead to proceed. We did, as Elena mentioned, we issued an RFQ on March the 7th. Those submittal of qualifications were received on the 26th of March. On April 5th, a panel met to discuss the written submittals from the RFQs. We conducted interviews last Tuesday and last Thursday. 3 semifinalists were selected for the comp plan, 3 for the downtown master plan. We're here tonight or today to discuss kind of where we are. As I mentioned, the June 8th meeting and then the June 15th, June 8th public meeting, and then the June 15th tentative award of contract. Here are the RFQ panelists that participated in this. Elena Chafin and Steve Bartlett were there. Elena would theoretically be the project manager. Steve was there as a technical advisor. But these are the folks that reviewed the RFQs, the written submittals, and they were also the ones that were in the interviews and would eventually be scoring the interviews once we're at that process. So these are the individuals that participated in that. And then this was in your packet, so I went ahead and added it to the slide deck. Here are the submittals, the names of the firms that submitted. As Elena mentioned, 10 firms submitted submittals on the comprehensive land use plan, and we had 13 that submitted for the downtown master plan. So the scores that you see were scores that were provided through the written review. So it was not, these are not scores from the interviews, because we have not we have not reconvened the team on the previous list, the previous slide, that to go through the scores and score those 3 firms that we interviewed last week. So these scores that you see on this page and that was in your packet were purely from reviewing what they submitted in writing. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions that you may have of myself or of Elena or anybody else that was on the panel.
Okay. Now, would we have any, Dr. Kay or anybody else to make comments from the public? Would that be appropriate at a workshop?
It's up to the discretion of the mayor.
I'd like to hear any comments from the public. Okay.
I think it's great that you're including the, oh.
You might need it.
More problematic. Okay.
Please state your name.
Nancy Niehaus.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Okay, Mayor Mize, I just want to say that I think it's great that you're including the community members.
Good. Thank you. Thanks so much. Sure, absolutely. You put some blood and sweat and tears into it, so I think you should be able to talk about it.
Hey everyone, Mikhail Kulyavtsev. I think you've all got an email from me at one point. I'm the chair of the Economics and Finance Department at SFA. I sort of volunteered myself to get involved, not knowing what I'd be getting into. But no, it was a great experience. I'm thankful for Elena and Mario inviting me to be on the panel. I learned a lot. This was very professionally interesting to me. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I've taught at SFA for 14 years now, so I've been a NAC resident this time, which I consider to be a long-time resident. So I'm invested in this community. I'm interested in what happens professionally as well as personally. So this is where I met my spouse. We're raising a child here now, so this is very interesting to me on many levels. And so what I've seen over the 14 years I've lived here is that the community really hasn't changed a lot much. As Mario and Elena both just summarized, there have been plans that are quite dated to improve things, to grow things, to economically develop things, and by and large, not a whole lot has taken place. And I've listened to a few of the city council meetings, and you hear some of the same concerns that you've heard for years, that there's an aging infrastructure, that the costs of maintaining things are still there. And so, the cost of these projects that are being proposed is quite substantial, but they're also sorely needed. Like, it is very clear that a new plan is very needed, both the comprehensive plan and the downtown plan. So the proposals were very carefully vetted. We listened to a lot of the details, and all of these firms, all 10 on the comprehensive plan and the 13 on the downtown plan, brought a lot of expertise with them. They have a group of engineers and landscape designers and environmental specialists. So this is not something we can easily do at SFA, for instance. This is not something a small team of faculty who otherwise have a full-time job can just jump in and do on the side. So it sounds like a really big undertaking. I'm glad the city is considering doing it. It's, again, something we should definitely do.
Thank you again for your help.
Of course.
Well, if you'll indulge me, I'd kind of like to lead off. I couldn't sleep last night, so anyway, I made myself a few notes. But anyway, as you look back to 1974, the 70 to 80 was my years to go from 8 to 18. And so this place is vivid in my imagination. And several things happened during that time. We had the integration of the schools. We combined E.J. Campbell with NISD, and then that brought about the need for a new high school. And so we purchased the property during that time at the Loop and Appleby Sand Road. And about that time, Stephen F. Austin was building a new stadium. So they had an old one that wasn't used anymore, so we took the bones of that stadium and we moved it out onto that, and that's what began the new high school as we know it today. So as I was in high school, we'd drive out. We'd drive from the old high school out to the football stadium to practice. So, you know, all of these things occurring, we're changing our city. So then we passed a bond, and we built a new high school so we could take care of all of these new students that we had through combined schools. And we moved into that school in 1979. We were the first graduating class. As that happened then, so University Drive began to develop between the 70s and 80s. First we got the stretch. Mr. Bolden, do you remember? Were you here during that? I don't know. Y'all weren't. Were y'all here yet? Y'all were here? So the stretch between, I think, Star and Main was first, and then we got from Star to Austin, and then from Main back out to the Loop, and then I went off to college before we ever got north from Austin out to the Loop. So again, just the, you know, maybe even just the integration of our schools is what began all of this process that stretched us and took us out and expanded our city. And again, that's what was going on in the 70s. And so I was sitting there last night and thinking about downtown. So you had Navarro Cox Tire Company, which is over on University Drive, Boatman Tire now, or Lee Schaffner. And then you had Shepherd's up here on North Street. You had Mize Department Store, which was it, and Schmidt's were the place where you bought clothes. Bell's was where Tom's old office was our other. So all of our clothing supply was in this downtown area. You had Shaw's Department Store, Branch Patton Hardware, and Case and Monk Hardware. We didn't have Walmart. That's where we got all of our hardware. Wyatt's Office Supply was a huge office supply store that was right here next door to us. And but you didn't have Staples, and you certainly didn't have the internet. So this is where we got all those things. This block was really neat. Striplin's Pharmacy had a lunch counter, and again, that's not in the old days. That's not like a soda counter like you see in some of these old time things. This was where I would walk at lunchtime. So anyway, Yaakov Fritz Sandwich Shop was in that block. You don't remember?
I remember.
Do you?
Yeah.
And then you go a block down, Bell's, Jean's Barrel, Schmidt's, McCrory's. Again, Case and Monk was down there. Walker's. I remember walk on into Walker's for a new pair of shoes. A pawn shop, McLean's Menswear, Hooper's Barbershop, Western Auto, Big A's. Anyway, it was our town. It was our retail. It was all that we had that was going on in the 70s. So what kind of hit me in the face was, how can we use a plan from 1974 to plan going forward when that doesn't happen anymore? These roads that went out of downtown, we created a mall that's still there, but we got Northview Plaza, and we got University Park Plaza, and then we got all this retail, you know, up and down University and North Street. So, you know, we've got to do something. We've got to do something to make this downtown viable again. We've got too many empty buildings. And so, you know, you've got to start with a plan, and then we've got to create some rules, we've got to create some guidelines to develop this place, and so we can, you know, make a change and really make something out of it. So that's my thoughts. So Ms. Fisher?
Me first? Yeah. Okay. I've got a couple of questions, probably from Mario, probably. I wanted to clarify that the task force, the task forces that you're suggesting are separate and apart from the consultant's own community engagement plans and efforts.
Correct.
Right?
I mean, I think they're working in conjunction.
Right,
So,
right.
so again, this would be council appointments. So when I say it needs to be SFA, these are just my suggestions. They could be in any, you don't have to agree to those, but they're your appointments but they would be working directly with the consultant while they're present here, making sure that they are providing feedback, what they're hearing, if they're going to church, in the grocery store, just their comings and goings when they're working with or visiting with people in the community. They can give that feedback to the consultant when they're working, but definitely it would be separate and apart.
Right, like it's not the consultant's
No, ma'am,
sole
not at all. No, ma'am.
community engagement.
No, not at all, not at all.
And then when you guys were interviewing them, did you guys get into the details of what their community engagement efforts look like?
Yeah, and they come from, really a variety of different means. Some of it can be certainly online, just because, we're not in the throes of a pandemic, but we were still sort of uncertain as to where things were going. They're looking at some of them are talking about coming to our festivals and setting up booths and getting information from people at various festivals, going out doing walkabouts in the community, doing your traditional things that you could have hosting a meeting, whether at City Hall or at a rec center. So it's just a variety of different ways to engage people. So we really left it up to them to come up with some unique ways to engage the community, and certainly they're going to receive our feedback and suggestions from the committee, the committee that you established, because they may have viewpoints and connections that certainly I wouldn't have, and they certainly won't have because they're not local. But we can definitely work towards making sure that voices are heard.
Okay, yeah. I mean, personally, I would like to see that aspect of it be robust, and I hope that is communicated to the finalists, and then when council ends up reviewing whose staff recommends as the finalists for both plans, I would like to hear
Sure.
some good details.
Absolutely.
on
We
that.
can bring that details, and if there's some things that's missing that you think is important enough to add to it, or we can certainly do that.
Thank you. Right now, I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Anderson?
In general, I'm very much in favor of both of these updated plans. They are, obviously, downtown is very different than it was in 1974, as you mentioned. And the community in general is different and moving in a different direction than it was even in 2003. And I think part of the reason that we have not necessarily sort of constantly gone to our current comprehensive plan is that it is, quite frankly, obsolete, in my opinion. I'm not entirely. There are certainly elements that apply still, but so much has changed, and I-69 being a big part of that. And with downtown, there are a lot of ways that I think you and I have talked about ways that we might be able to get some of the building owners together to work together to hopefully get those properties sold and in the hands of people who have the resources and a vision to develop those properties. And if we have that sort of overarching guidance, I think that'll help that process a whole lot. And not just for downtown, but for the community in general with the comprehensive plan. A lot of what I've heard, not just my constituents, but my family members, my friends, complain about over the years has been a lack of direction with development in particular in Nacogdoches. And this is, to me, an absolutely crucial first step toward having that direction, having some standards, having somewhere to go with development rather than just sort of picking away at it in little pockets.
Thank you. And then, well, one thing that wasn't mentioned in the comments by myself or Elena is, especially with the master plan, like with downtown, One of the things that it opens us up for, makes us even from an eligibility perspective, is just to receive grants through foundations, through these various Texas historical programs. A lot of times they may believe and they totally see the fact that we have a need, but we're not ready. And so other entities are more ready because they have a plan and we don't have one. And so in essence, it makes us ineligible, even though we have very worthy projects, but it doesn't fulfill that criteria when it comes from a master plan perspective.
One thing I'd like to see after we have a public forum and before we award any contract is for us to, I assume we're gonna have some period during which we can digest the public input and apply that toward the selection of the consulting firm that we will use for the two different plans.
Could you elaborate just?
Well, basically taking into account what sort of input we get with the public forum, and applying that to maybe strengths or weaknesses with various of the finalists,
Oh, I see.
and using that to inform a final decision.
Okay. Okay.
Good.
And that's all for me.
Ms. Bellinger?
We're on.
Is it green?
It's green, you're on.
Okay. Well, I too have been awake at night about this. Not really myself thinking about back in the 70s, and yes, I was here.
When did y'all get here?
76, so.
Yeah, you were.
Yep, we were definitely here. But also because I've been getting a lot of calls from friends, constituents, businesses, some later at night, actually. So I've probably had 20, 25 calls and questions about this process. And I'm glad, Jade, that you brought up that time period between the public forum and the award, because that's essential. I wanted to say just a couple of things. We've had things change, not just to new council persons, but we are coming out of a pandemic. We have also had a lot more community engagement in these last few months and a lot more interest. And so this is something that I hope that we can capitalize on even before the award of any kind of grants. Because what we have here is we have not only significant dollars, but we're talking about, this is not like a contract on the roof, which I know we need up here, but it's a contract for something that's going to last for a long time, particularly if we want to see it utilized and implemented. So we really need robust community engagement, and I would say even before, so not just one public forum, but a few public forums that might actually be targeted. For example, we're the oldest town in Texas. What is our history? how would our history actually impact downtown? There's discussion about moving the old stone fort from the university. Where would it go downtown? So these discussions are really community discussions that we might be able to hold even before a contractor, and they also might inform who we choose as a contractor. So that's something I think we might want to take into consideration. And another part of our history is our multiple histories. For example, our African American heritage here. We would want to, instead of just inviting them to a large forum, go into the communities, these specific communities, the Spanish community, the Spanish settlers. There's a lot of interest in history. We had several people who have wanted to really develop that as part of the I-69 corridor. So I understand full well that in comprehensive planning that's part of it, but even before we choose a contractor, if we are concerned about history, if we hold these public forums, then that might help us to really think and add other criteria to our choice. So one public forum, but also multiple public forums, and then use that to inform who we choose. I'd also like to, I know I'm talking a little bit
It's
here,
okay,
but
it's your turn.
I'd also like to actually see the scoring for the different contractors, because the scoring for the RFQs was pretty broad, half of it for process and creativity. And I know my students, if I give them half points for process and creativity, I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna get. And then another 25 for experience and qualifications. Again, if we actually know, if we can zero this down and get more input about what really the citizens want, I think we would understand more about the scoring. But I'd also like to see the scoring for at least the finalists, to see what exactly we were weighing and all
Sure.
that. I have a couple other comments, so if you'd come back to me afterwards, but that's enough for right now.
Mr. Bowling?
Thank you, Mayor. Most of the thoughts have already been touched on, but there was two words that were stated earlier that have my concern, and it was move quickly. And I don't look at this project as moving quickly, and especially with engaging communities. June the 8th is way too quick to have engaged all of the communities. You may have engaged one group, but the total community as a whole, that is earlier than we can put any type of package together for the community, whether it's media or town hall meetings, et cetera. And we certainly should have more than one town hall meeting. I wrote these notes down, but in no certain order. Besides what's already been spoken about from the other city council members, is having reached out for comments, feedback, input from all communities, we're having an issue, and communities now are getting more involved, but it's about particular issues. It's not overall. Either one of these plans are not even involved in those concerns. So, but we need some way close the gap on getting information out to all of the communities.
Okay. May I ask for just a couple of clarifying questions? So obviously, I've recommended a public meeting on June 8th for a community forum. What's the right number?
Well, let me just speak about that time frame, June, July, and August. We're coming out of, we're opening up from the pandemic, where we can travel, et cetera. 2 weeks, there's going to be a lot of people out on vacations for the next 3 months who would maybe like to have input on any of these two plans, but they're probably not going to be able to do that in a town hall meeting setting. They maybe do it on media, but, and that's why I suggest we have more than one town hall meeting.
So, okay, so is it?
What about the idea of doing maybe 1 June, 1 July, 1 August? That to me gives everyone time and an opportunity to maybe revisit if they think of something else. Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying,
about?
and especially like.
Kind of drawing the timeline out a little. Yeah.
It's been mentioned that input from the citizens, and then we're going to have everything ready for the end of June. No, we need to receive the input from the citizens, the communities, and look at that, and then, give another opportunity for maybe a different group.
So let me just make sure, because I want to make sure that we capture it right. So is the intent if we do one in June, July, and August, is the intent to get feedback if we even want to do the studies?
Oh, no.
Okay, well, that's different, because that's what I'm hearing, because we're trying to get a contractor two consultants started so that we can have the very conversations that you're talking about, because I can't tell you who these firms are going to be. We've interviewed them last week. We have not met as a team since the interview of those 5 folks that participated, including myself, to score them. The thought would be is that we would have a forum just to give the community an update, just like what we did today. Just to say, I started in August, not to rehash all that, but we didn't have this. These are dated. Here's why we're looking at doing it, and this is where we find ourselves. And the next step would be is to select a consultant or 2 consultants, and then we would kick the project off with this committee, these 2 committees, these 2 task forces together, so that we can start having those very things that you're talking about. We're not here to get.
That was my understanding.
June
that
8th is not the purpose of June 8th is not to say, do we want a certain type of look and feel, and that doesn't mean that we won't get that input. But I would say please hold that input later, because we've got to set up a schedule. We're just here to update you on where we are in the process, and to see if you have any feedback for us. And then we would like to eventually bring the council a recommendation on a consultant, so that we can then start doing the full public engagement process. We're not going to do this all in one setting. We're going to have multiple meetings. You're talking about Councilmember Bellinger about going into the community. That's exactly what we want to be doing, is working with the consultant to go do that and get that feedback about what they would like to see, whether it's I-69 or the downtown or in a specific neighborhood or any neighborhood in the community. That's the intent of these public engagement efforts. This was just to update the community on where we are in the process.
Yeah.
For June 8th, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the statement, kick off projects in July, what does actually that details?
Literally, we're signing a contract and we're starting to, they are now engaged with the city. In other words, we are a client of XYZ firm, and they are starting to come here and meet with city staff to start laying out a full-fledged calendar, and meet with this committee that you all appoint to start laying out the Gantt chart, the schedule of how this thing is going to play out in the specifics, the details. That's what I see as kicking off the project.
Because it seems like there are 2 things going on that we're talking about public input for, right? So there's seeking public input to determine whether there are some qualifications that staff should be looking at that they didn't consider previously when picking a consultant, which is different from public input in terms of what this comprehensive plan and the vision for Nacogdoches is gonna look like.
Yes.
So what are,
That's the last statement you made.
the
latter.
second
Yeah.
one is the one
Yeah.
that you were talking about for multiple community
Right.
forums, okay. So.
And that will take 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I would expect the same thing,
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
and
a
not in the
given.
sense of just like, here's a public forum, but like
No.
actually like what Mrs. B said, going into the community.
Absolutely.
And meeting people where they are.
Absolutely.
But so so Mr. Bolden, you're talking about wanting to have multiple forums and public input, once the consultant is picked.
Exactly.
Okay.
I feel it's necessary.
I agree.
Yeah.
And
but-
we agree, I mean, we are totally in sync there.
Okay, and so then in that case, the timeline for you, I'm just trying to understand, for you particularly,
And let me insert
Yeah, go
that.
ahead.
And we are specifically wanting to make sure that we don't go quickly on this engagement, because we need to include students from SFA. They're not going to be here June, July, August. Well, maybe August, but they're just kind of starting up. So we're going to have to seek input from them in the months of September and October. So it's not this hurry up. It's just at some point we have to negotiate a contract, and we have to bring a contract to this body to either approve or decline or deny. And so that's kind of the getting there. And then the citizen engagement, public engagement, that's easily 2 months in the making. I mean, not every day, but you know, going into the community and getting scheduled and working with various groups that I've worked with since I've started, and just getting the civic clubs, hitting some of the community groups, going to the churches, going to the Hispanic community, making sure that we're getting input from them in their language. Again, as mentioned before, meeting people where they are. That's first and foremost. Every one of the consultants that we interviewed, they've used that phrase specifically on doing that.
Yeah, I didn't have any issues with the contract timeline.
Oh, okay.
And you know, I like the plan.
Okay.
If I may speak a
Yes.
little bit more. So one of the concerns is, again, let's go back to that, hosting a community forum and then picking the contractor in that short period of time. One issue is, some people have said, I think what we're trying to do is make Nacogdoches like Fredericksburg. And then other people, somebody I never knew came up to me at the brewery and said, I moved here from Fredericksburg because I don't like Fredericksburg anymore. So I don't know why Fredericksburg is all of a sudden an issue for everybody, but it seems to have been an issue. So if we are choosing a contractor who really likes the Fredericksburg model, I'm just going to throw that out, it might be a mistake if we just hold one forum just to tell the community. By the way, if we just hold one forum, all we're doing is telling people, we're not giving them an opportunity for input. We have to give more opportunity for input if we're going to give just one forum. You're going to have to give at least 2 or 3 to get input from specific communities. Otherwise, it's more like lip service, or it's a token kind of forum for people. So could we possibly spread that out a little bit over, knowing that the contractor is going to go deeper into the community and get more engagement, and spread that out and maybe actually reduce the cost of what might be involved, because we'll be able to give them more information. But at least have several forums over the summer, and go into the communities to make sure we know what it is we're looking for. Are we looking for somebody who has historic experience? Are we looking for somebody who wants to make sure we get stores that are in other places, or are we looking for people who want to make sure that we develop our own and we recognize it? I shudder to think that we will even choose a contractor for a downtown development plan without talking to, for example, the Bright Foundation, the landowners, the businesses and merchants and restaurants who are downtown, the Historic Landmark, Friends of Historic Nacogdoches. All of those people, I think, would need to be engaged prior to choosing a contractor for the downtown, because they have put their blood, sweat, and tears into this downtown. So, and I could say the same thing for the larger one. Just more community engagement up front before we choose the contractor.
But is it basically, again, to determine whether we even do a plan or not? Is that the intent?
No, I think we probably need to do a plan, but I'd like to hear from them first. I mean, actually, and if so, what size plan? What needs to be in the plan? What would they like to see? People have given me, including downtown merchants, have asked to be involved first before there's a choice of a downtown contractor to do a comprehensive plan. There's another issue too. I know we have, NEDCO's done a strategic plan, the Hogg Foundation, Better Together, they have done quite a bit of engagement. All that may need to be put into a package even before we enter into a comprehensive plan. Because we're talking about $400,000 here, $100,000 for downtown. Possibly it might be able to be reduced a little bit if we do some of the legwork, and also if we hear from these downtown people. So, and that's just downtown. Again, there are other issues, across the board.
But okay, so then that would be forums, what you're proposing is more forums to determine qualifications that we find that the community finds important for consultants versus for the plan.
Right.
Right, because I think for the plans, that's gonna be built in.
Qualifications and possibly the extent of the plan. They may have input into what that plan might look like. So we just have very vague understanding of what this plan is, just from the RFQs. We're at a disadvantage, we haven't seen what has been
Understood.
proposed.
But that's why you have a staff
So,
to,
right.
it's why you have a professional staff to go through the process. And, we have a procurement process, you have a city manager, you've got planners, you've got a planner, you've got a couple of engineers. So we went through that process to develop a request for qualifications that fits the things that are most important to many people that I've heard from council about I-69 being an issue. Obviously, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things are changing as far as how things are developing, and we have a housing issue. We don't have enough housing, and so we make sure we incorporated that. And so, it's pretty inclusive of all these major issues that are affecting our community.
It's just we haven't seen the details of it, and possibly,
The
this is a
detail,
lot-
but which details, I guess?
Well, for example, with the awards, even the top 3 finalists, what exactly are we talking about in the comprehensive plan?
So you're talking about just their what they submitted as far as
Sure,
looking at those
sure. I
details?
think that would be helpful to us.
Okay.
And then also to see, again, we'll go back to downtown, for example, if the downtown merchants and if the downtown businesses that are expanding right now, they have an interest in how they're going to expand, we possibly might be able to, it's a lot of money, $400,000.
It is a lot of
We might
money.
be able to reduce some of the costs a little bit if we have information already to give to them. I'd just like to hear from them before we go into awarding something, or even before we have a week, a public forum, and then a week before we award. I think we need to hear from these people.
Okay.
I don't think that we're talking about hearing from people or not hearing from people, right? Everybody agrees that we want to hear from the community on the way that these comprehensive plans or the downtown master plan develops, and how and what vision and all of that. And so it seems to me like the only thing that needs to be ferreted out right now by council is the timeline, and whether we are comfortable with staff choosing a consultant, given that community engagement will be robust and diverse once that consultant is picked, versus getting input on what consultant to pick. And if it's the latter, then that would be reasoning for prolonging the timeline on the front end. Am I understanding that correctly?
Or just stopping the whole process and redeveloping the request for qualifications. I just don't know what different, outside of some formatting, what's gonna be the difference of the content?
Well, a lot of the major issues are things that we've been identifying over the last few years.
The issues that I've heard since I've started is infrastructure, I-69, housing recently, just because of the housing crunch. We've got a downtown that obviously needs, some resurgence there. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and economic development are some of the key things.
Identifying the overarching issues, to me, has largely already been done. So I'm not sure that sort of revisiting all of that is going to be a huge benefit to the process, and I don't think it's going to be a huge benefit to selecting a consultant ultimately. We've already made it very clear that community engagement is going to be a huge part of the process, regardless of which consultant is chosen, and I'm sure that you and staff and everyone involved have made it clear to the candidates, that is a big part of it. And I would assume that if they are qualified, that they already knew that anyway. So I'm not sure that, you know, drawing out the selection process endlessly is of particular benefit, really.
I mean, if we need to have more public forums of what we're planning on the 8th, if we need to have a second or a third, be happy to do that. It's just a matter of scheduling it and finding a venue to do so, and it doesn't have to be in the same location. It could be in a completely different locale. We'd be happy to do so. I mean, and I'm sure we can extend a little bit as far as negotiations just to kind of get those things. I want to make sure we don't get too far in the summer, because then we start losing people, and then there's a concern. Well, you had it on July 4th. I know I'm kidding, but you know, in early July, well, you know, most people are on vacation on early July, and so they're not available. So we were trying to find a way. So if we need to do one on July is it July the 8th? Is that right? The date that I have, July 8th. And if we need to have another one later, June 8th, excuse me, June 8th. And if we need to have another one that same week, or if we need to have another one the following week, we can certainly do that. That's not a problem. We can certainly do that and bring something to council. We just have to work with, whenever we determine who the finalist is, if that's okay, bring something to you all in July. But for council consideration on a contract, but we can certainly work towards doing another or a second or a third forum in the month of June, and not get too far into June, because then like I said, we start losing people into the summer. But we can certainly do that, if that would help. But again, is it ultimately the presentation that we would be giving would be similar to what was presented tonight, and again, to sort of express why we're doing it, what we're doing, how these firms were selected or how they would be selected, and ultimately we would bring a contract to council. So I just wanted to make sure it's intended to be able to provide an update to the community, knowing that people may come with suggestions about how they want to see downtown, and we can capture it, but that's not public engagement. That is what the consultant would be doing to make sure we're fully obtaining all of the feedback available from the community. That's what I was thinking we would be doing with this process. Right? And I know there's differences of opinion. I'm just saying collectively that's what I thought we would be doing. Okay. So you just need to tell me if we need to do a couple of more forums, we can do that.
So do you want to add a forum in June?
So I would recommend that we have a forum or a meeting of the downtown people who are engaged.
That's fairly easy. The other one,
Yeah,
outside groups
there's
can be-
already an organization of downtown merchants.
Right, but there may be other ones that
who-
we want to invite. For example, Bright Foundation, people who have put their blood, sweat, and tears. So I would say we need to have that meeting. We need to have a meeting of people who are interested in historic Nacogdoches. All of the histories of Nacogdoches, I think that's a topic we need to have. And then we might need two others where we go deeper into a community. So I think 4 might be, what do you think, Mr. Bolden? I'm just trying to think, we need to go deeper into some of the communities. I know that the comprehensive planning will go much more deeply in to collect it, but just up front to make sure that they're engaged right at the beginning, and if they have some concern about the process, that it can be voiced and they can include it in the comprehensive planning to begin with. So at least those forums, and then and review it after that.
So
You'd say less.
I would tend to
I'm kind of
disagree with
for
doing
less,
4
I
more.
think, too.
That seems excessive to me, and it's going to be very difficult to get everybody together to do that at specific times in a relatively short time span. Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion anyway is, yeah.
Could we compromise at 2 or possibly 3?
Well, do 3 then.
So I heard town hall meeting the 8th. We're keeping that.
Right.
So
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify my 3. Because we've got at least one with the business, we've got at least one with historic.
Yeah, and Bright Foundation is historic as well. I mean, so some of that can be combined.
Well, I mean,
Well,
I think
also
the topic, it
Yeah.
has to be, I think we're.
Why
gonna
can't the
talk-
topic stuff be done, I mean, I think that the topic is a great idea, but why it can't be included as part of the forums or town halls or meetings once we picked a consultant?
Yeah, I'm not sure how
I
that's
guess
going to
my
inform the
thing is,
selection process.
I'm not qualified to talk about the history, and I'm just not. That's why I'm saying it was more, like I said, we'd be happy to have a forum, multiple forums, you know, so one on the 6th, or excuse me, the 8th of June, if, you know, at the rec center. We can do one hosted here in the downtown area, wherever that may be, talk about the process, and again, and a third one somewhere else, but it's not
As
to
you said,
talk
these
about.
were intended, or the one potentially more were intended to be more informational than really doing that engagement and getting the sort of deeper dive
Right.
input. That was my understanding from talking to you.
Right.
So, you know, I'm more interested in what we need to do to inform the best decision that we can have, certainly. But there has to be, you know, some limit to that as well. And I'm not sure that having 4 public forums and meetings is,
Well, and then you get to a point that people get confused, and there's meeting fatigue.
Yeah,
and, I mean, and so it's,
there's such a thing as too much, yeah, without a doubt. And if it's not, you know, absolutely pertinent to the selection process, then that's something that to me gets put into the actual information gathering process once consultants are chosen.
would council be amenable if we were to have one in May?
That's awfully
Yeah.
quick.
I mean, to get your downtown people, that's not gonna take
Yeah,
very long.
downtown,
But
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
pretty
that's-
easy. The Bright Foundation and that group, so I mean, we could do that.
You got a
pretty
Main
fast.
Street board and is Main Street Association, I mean, is that
Network.
appropriate?
And we'd want to invite, you know, whoever wants to come, who's part of it.
Oh, it's open to the public, absolutely.
Sure, yeah, it would absolutely would be, yeah.
But you're gonna still have to do it through those. I mean, there's not a better communication method to get to those downtown merchants than maybe Main Street or
Yeah, but we
that
can,
kind
yeah,
of
we
thing.
can do.
Okay.
If
So
we can try May, can I try that?
Could we go maybe May and June and kind of then follow the recommended steps that you've got there on the schedule? Can we
Yes.
get consensus on that?
Sounds good to me.
And then, again, we would be working towards, and again, we'd be happy to give you a list of names for these committees, or completely out of it, and you all come up with the list on your own as far as just representatives from Netco, Main Street, or not Main Street, but the Historic Society and those. I mean, we
Bright
can give you,
Foundation,
we can
yeah.
give you a list of those
CVB,
folks if you'd like, just, again, so you can at least mull it over.
Yeah, it would be good to have some discussion
Yes.
Yeah.
on whether we want
Okay.
representatives from certain, or how we want to
Okay.
make up this tax.
So what I heard is certainly keep the 8th of June, add a second meeting, in the downtown area, sort of open to the public, but include, folks that are interested in history, Bright, downtown, and open to anybody, and we shoot for some date in May, just to kind of get us started, if not, maybe in June, but try it in that, kind of that 2-week window, late May to early June. And then, come to you all later with a list of potential names, for the various
And then
committees.
we'll feel free to add if we.
Absolutely,
want to.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And also you want to spread that time out between June 8th and June 16th so we can incorporate input. Right?
So why don't we do this? Why don't we have a workshop on mid-June? I guess, is that this 15th?
15th, yeah.
Have a workshop on 15th, kind of what we heard, an update to you all, and then work towards bringing a contract to you all in July. Would that work?
Yeah,
Sounds good.
sounds good to me.
All right.
Got your orders?
Yes, sir. I'm gonna go back and watch the video.
Oh, I
Thank
forgot
you.
the videos.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Jan, can we just go right on into our meeting? All right. Okay, then we will move on into our, into our open forum.
We didn't have anybody sign up for open
Okay,
forum.
nobody for open forum?
No,
Good
sir.
deal. Okay, next we'll look at number 5, items to be removed from the consent agenda. If there are any, please let me know.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Okay, on to the regular agenda. Public hearing to discuss and consider a request for approval of historic overlay for lots 29 and 5B, City Block 35, located at 500 Forbes Street. Historic overlay number 2021-002, Assistant Community Services Director.
Thank
Hello.
you, Mayor. Hi. Nice to see you guys today. My name is Hannah Anderson, and I am Assistant Community Services Director for the city. And I'm going to present the request for historic overlay of 500 Forbes Street, which is located at lots 29 and 5B of City Block 35. This application was brought to us by David W. Peterson Jr., and he is the property owner. This is the building there. The residence was constructed in 1899, although the builder is unknown. To qualify for historic overlay, one of 6 criteria must be met, and 500 Forbes qualifies under criterion number 4, which is that it embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type or period of architecture or method of construction, and this property is of the folk Victorian architectural style. The application was received at the end of March, and staff commenced the process of this zoning change. Letters were sent in April, and the Historic Landmark Preservation Committee recommended approval of this zoning change on May 3rd. Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval on May 10th. This map shows the location of the property in question. It is notated by that flag. As you can see, Virginia Avenue Historic District is located to the south, and there are several properties around the property in question which are shaded in pink and designated as outside. These properties are outside of the historic district, which is what this 500 Forbes will be as well. It means that they get the same protections as any of the properties in a historic district. They're just outside of any of our 5 historic districts. The property that you see in the middle there is Nettie Marshall. And this map shows the zoning in more detail. Thank you to Elena and Tread for their help with this. And as you can see, it is largely residential in that area. At this time, I am happy to answer any questions about the property or about historic overlays in general, if there are any.
Okay, thank you. I guess next we would have public comment. Anyone here with a comment on this item? Okay, appears there is none. Okay, council, we'll start with Mr. Bolden.
No question. Is that property up for sale?
Not that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
Ms.
You want to
Bellinger?
buy it?
I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
That's beautiful.
You good? Mr. Anderson?
Now, I honestly didn't know that you could designate spots outside of the stricter overlays. And had I known that, I might have sought that for my house before now. I may do that from here on out. But no, I certainly don't see any reason not to do that.
Okay. Do you have a motion for approval? Moved.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you, great job. A lot
Thank you so
better than
much.
the previous presenter. Okay, we'll move on to B, public hearing to consider an ordinance amending the boundaries of a zoning district within the city of Nacogdoches from B2 General Business to R1 Single Family for Lot 2, Block 2 of the Linden Grange Addition located at 120 Carl Street. This request has been submitted by Linda Holmes Sis, case file ZON 2021-03 by our city planner.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Lana Chafin, City Planner. As you stated, this is a zone change request from B2 General Business to R1 Single Family for about a quarter of an acre located at 120 Carl Street. The R1 Single Family District is intended for low-density single-family uses, and lots in this district must be at least 250 square feet or larger. The applicant does own the subject property, which again is part of the Linden Grange Addition, and intends to develop the lot as a single-family residence. The Linden Grange Addition is located at the intersection of North Street and Carl Street. This subdivision was established in 1968, and at the time, deed restrictions were imposed to limit the development of the subdivision to single-family because we didn't have zoning at that time. Zoning wasn't adopted until 1970. And so whenever we adopted our zoning ordinance, the city actually conducted some city-initiated zone changes and zoned a lot of property along our major corridors as commercial. So that purple that you see is part of that city-initiated zone change right when we adopted. But the deed restrictions actually impose that the area is limited to single-family development. And the two lots that you see at the intersection of North Street and Carl Street, those are actually owned and maintained by the HOA as a buffer between North Street and the remainder of the subdivision. And those have been owned and maintained by the HOA since the establishment of the area. The remaining portion of the subdivision is zoned and developed as single family, except for the lot that's immediately north of the subject property. And again, that's part of that zone change that the city initiated after we adopted zoning. The property immediately to the north and south is also zoned and developed as residential, with the properties that immediately front North Street having that commercial zoning and commercial development. The future land use plan does designate this parcel as commercial, but if you look, you can see the remainder of the subdivision is designated as single family. And whenever we're looking at the future land use map, it's not meant to be a parcel by parcel specific mandate. It's really just a more general, almost like a crayon coloring to show generally how property should be developed in the future. And this request also is in line with some of the land use policies outlined in the comprehensive plans, specifically referring to infill development, encouraging development where we already have existing infrastructure. So staff does find that it is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. These are some site photos taken. Whenever we received this request, we actually had a building permit under review, and that's when it came to our attention that the property was actually zoned commercial. So at that time, we let the property owner know, hey, we need an application for a zone change. And so you'll see that there's been some dirt work done, but they did cease and desist all activities until the zone change is approved. This are just some additional photos of the subject property. You see the single-family home immediately to the west. We did send out 200-foot notification, the written letters to all the property owners within 200 feet. This included the neighborhood HOA. We also sent courtesy notifications to all the property owners within 500 feet per the new courtesy notice policies that City Council adopted. And we also placed a zone change sign on the property. You saw that in some of those site photos. And we also posted those notices on our website and some of our social media platforms. So in response to those notices, we did receive 3 responses. 2 were written, 1 was verbal. We did attach those 2 written responses to your agenda packet. They were in support. 1 included the neighborhood HOA, and then the telephone contact was actually from the adjacent property owner who is also a resident who also supports the zone change request. These are the criteria on your screen that City Council should consider when considering any request for a zone change application. They include compatibility with adjacent land uses, providing for orderly growth and development, ensuring that they're supporting facilities to actually support the development, the design of drives, parking, lighting, landscaping, actually providing for adequate nuisance prevention, and then compliance with the comprehensive plan. Based on all the findings, including the staff report and those that we mentioned during the presentation, we do find that the request meets all the criteria, and we do recommend approval. The applicant is also in attendance, should the commission have should the council have any questions of them. And with that, I will conclude staff's presentation and open it up for any questions from the council.
Okay, again, I think first we go to public comment. I'm sorry, I think first we probably hear from Ms. Sisk if she would care to. It's your call. You're good? Okay. Okay, great, thank you. Any public comment? Okay, council, Mr. Anderson?
My understanding is that it looks like this will still maintain those 2 buffer lots that the HOA owns there.
Yes, in the deed restrictions, they've actually restricted those 2 specific lots to maintain a green open space buffer.
I guess my only other issue would be that maybe we could find a way in the permit office, possibly with the sign in there, to remind our local builders that they need to confirm zoning before they start working.
Yeah, yes, and we are working on additional processes. I think in this case, there was just an assumption made because every other lot in such subdivision is single family, so they're like, oh, well, it's, you know. And so I don't think there was any.
I know where assumptions get me generally, so.
Yeah, yeah. In this case, I don't think there was any kind of intent, and the property owner was very quick to come forward with an application and work with staff to get that process through as quickly as possible.
But we've had a couple of issues recently where people have begun the process, sort of, I guess, gotten the cart ahead of the horse in some cases. So.
Yes, and we are actually doing some internal review, maybe to update our checklist and processes to make sure that all that information is on the front end when they're actually submitting in applications. So yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have it.
Anything? Ms. Bolton?
No, the buffer property, is that owned by the HOA or is that private individual?
It's owned by the HOA.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a minute question. The recommendation is to change it from B2 to R1, correct?
Yes, ma'am, and if you notice, there was a grammatical error in the body of the staff report, so we apologize about that.
Well, I just wanted to, if that made a difference later on, go ahead
Yeah.
and correct it, so we, you know, for the record, so
Yes,
that
ma'am.
somewhere somebody doesn't come back and say it should have been something else.
Yes, and I did mean to mention that at the beginning of the presentation, and I forgot, so thank you. But the agenda caption and all of the legal advertisements did include the correct verbiage.
And-
So I
and
think we're good on that
And
point.
the intro did too, so I just
ma'am.
wanted to be sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Do I have a motion for approval?
I'll make a motion to approve agenda item B for rezoning from a B2 general business to R1 single family.
Second.
Second, Ms. Fisher. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Are you here for the next also? Let's see.
Yes, I'll be here for a while.
Public hearing, consider an
All right.
ordinance amending the boundaries of a zoning district within the city of Nacogdoches from R1 single family to B2 general business for lot OL 49, city block 43, as described in a deed dated July 17, 2020, recorded in document number 2020-4460 of the real property records of Nacogdoches County, located on the south side of West Main Street, approximately 200 feet west of Bremont Street. This request has been submitted by Brent Ivy of Ivy Got Properties LLC, case file ZON 2021-04 by our city planner.
Thank you. Again, as you stated, this is a request for a zone change from R1 single family to B2 general business for approximately an acre of land located on the south side of West Main Street. The general business zoning district is intended to accommodate those business activities that are oriented towards the automobile or whose operations may require limited truck access. And generally, these districts are located along major traffic arteries where strip business development already exists. The applicant does own the subject property, and he also owns the tracts immediately to the east and west for a total of 2.2 acres, and he does intend to develop the property for commercial uses, including a potential restaurant. The subject property, again, is zoned R1 Single Family. The area does consist of a mix of zoning districts and land uses, including commercial and industrial development. You can see primarily to the east. Also several legal non-conforming single-family residences located along West Main Street. So at one point in time, this particular property was actually zoned B2 general business whenever the city adopted the zoning ordinance and the city initiated zone changes along our major arteries. And then whenever the property to the south and southeast was developed as single family, this parcel was included in that zone change request, but wasn't included in the overall development. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today, just to give you an idea. So the property located immediately to the south is vacant. You'll see that there's a structure on there that's actually an abandoned industrial structure that's been vacant for some time, but it's still zoned single family. If you go farther west along Main Street, you do see additional commercial development, strip retail, those types of uses. So the proposed zone change request is consistent with the zone change, with the other zoning in the area, and also consistent with some of the adjacent and land uses along West Main Street. The future land use plan does designate this area as single family. Again, whenever we're looking at the future land use plan, we're looking at generally how an area should be developed over time. You'll notice that immediately to the east is green. That's that rural development designation, which is really due to that significant floodplain in the area because we have a major creek going through there. And so while the request doesn't comply with the future land use plan, we also have to consider the other land use policies and goals that are outlined in the comprehensive plan. And it's also prudent to look at the other predominant zoning and land uses in the area and then assign zoning accordingly. So whenever we're looking at the adjacent land uses and zoning, like I described before, it is consistent, and this also encourages one of those future land use policies specifically for growth inward and long-term growth in appropriate areas, encouraging infill, planning for a mix of uses, and providing growth where adequate infrastructure already exists. These are some photos of West Main Street. You'll see the zoning sign right there up front. The property is vacant, and there's some mature trees and vegetation along the southern and western boundaries of the subject property. These are just some additional photos. The photo in the lower right-hand corner is the view to the north, so standing on the subject property and facing the north where that tree line boundary is. We did send out written notices to all the property owners within 200 feet. Again, this application was subject to those additional notices that I described earlier. Whenever we presented this to the Planning and Zoning Commission, we hadn't received any contacts before we wrote the staff report, but since then, we have received a written response, and we included that in your packet, and that was a written letter of support from, we received 2 letters of support, one from the property owner immediately to, well, not immediately to the west because he owns that property too, but the home immediately to the west of that. Mr. Fred Hooper, that's his permanent residence. He submitted a written letter of support as well. And then the property owner to the east also submitted a written response in support of the request. These are the criteria, again, for consideration from council for zone change requests. I won't go over them again, but these are the same criteria that we described in the item before. Staff does find that the request meets the criteria, and we do recommend approval. And the applicant is also in attendance if the council has any questions. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation and open it up for any questions.
All right. Mr. and Ms. Ivy, would you have any comment, or?
Not unless y'all were thinking of going against what planning and zoning did.
Okay.
Oh, yes, thank you. The Planning and Zoning Commission did recommend approval unanimously.
Great, all right. Yeah, any public comment? Okay, council, Ms. Bellinger?
I have no questions.
No.
Voted. Fisher?
I generally have, I get raised red flags when I see an R1 to B2, but none of those concerns are an issue here for me.
Great. Mr. Anderson?
Well, I do have a sort of a nostalgic wish that there was still an AMC dealership there, which used to be in that spot. But I'd love to see a restaurant there in the future too. That's my part of town, so I'm all for it.
I do have one question. On the FEMA floodplain, you said there are no structures or improvements proposed in the floodplain area.
Yes, ma'am.
So as long as there are no plans to build in that area in terms of environmental concerns, we're good, right?
Yes.
Not just legal environmental concerns, but real environmental concerns.
Yes, any new development would have to comply with our current standards. So today, we don't allow any development in the floodway, which is the actual waterway, and then we limit development in the floodplain, and we require all development to be built at least 1 inch above the base flood elevation. And then whenever we're looking at impervious, we make sure that there's a proper drainage and detention and so forth, so on. So it'll meet the same standards as any new commercial development. And I believe our city engineer is available if you guys really want to get into the weeds. I know enough to make me
That
dangerous.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good.
He's
Thank you.
just in the 500 year, though, not the 100, is that?
Yes,
Is that right?
it is his particular property is only in the 500. And there's no proposed buildings as far as future development in that area. It would just be maybe surface parking or something a lot like that. There wouldn't actually be any structures.
Good. Okay, do I have a motion to approve?
That's,
So-
yeah, go
I
ahead.
move that we approve item 7C as written.
Okay,
I'll second.
second, Mr. Anderson. Any more discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Thank you, you're approved. You want to give us some insight on what it's going to be?
There will be, a lot of outdoor seating, places where you can let kids run around. You can also, we plan to do alcohol. We'll be back for the special use permit later. But we have an idea for a wood fire pizza place.
Oh.
So, a lot of outdoor seating.
Great.
In walking distance of my house, I'm all for it.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Okay, D, public hearing, consider an ordinance amending the boundaries of a zoning district within the city of Nacogdoches from R1, single family, to B2, general business, for approximately 10.9 acres, being Lot 1A, City Block 64, located at 2827 Railroad Street. This request has been submitted by Warren Sparks, case file ZON 2021-01, our city planner.
Thank you. I did just want to remind the council that you first heard this item at your April 20th meeting, and then voted unanimously to postpone the public hearing to this meeting in order to explore some alternatives for the development, maybe potentially alternative access. So we'll talk about those later in the presentation, but I will go ahead and give another full brief overview of the facts of the case, and then staff's recommendation, planning and zoning's recommendation, and those conversations that we did have. So again, Mayor, this request is a zone change request from R1 single family to B2 general business. It's about 10.9 acres. And again, the general business zoning district is really intended to accommodate those business activities that are oriented towards the vehicle, may require limited truck or freight access, and limited along major arteries where a strip development already exists. The applicant does own the subject property. He also owns the lot immediately to the north, which is his primary residence. And he's been operating his business as a contractor yard on the subject property that you're hearing today. A contractor yard can be a lot of different things, but typically it's for storing open equipment and materials for construction business. The applicant does own a roadway pavement repair construction business, and that includes the transportation and storage of roadway construction materials and equipment on the subject property. The applicant's been operating this business at this location for at least 10 years. However, a contractor yard is only permitted in the B2 general business zoning district and also the light and heavy industrial zoning districts. This zone change request is in response to a zoning violation that was issued for conducting commercial activities in a residential zoning district. And so the applicant is requesting the zone change in order to continue operating the business at this location. As you see from the map, the primary zoning and development pattern in the area is residential. The light yellow that you see is R1 single family. The darker yellow is R2 single family, and then that light brown is R3 two family, which is also considered a residential zoning district. The property actually immediately to the west is Carpenter Elementary, and then you've got some single family to the south and some vacant wooded lots to the east. If you look at the comprehensive plan future land use map, it does designate this area as rural development. And rural development, again, is described by areas that may be encumbered because they don't have access to adequate utilities, may be encumbered by natural features such as waterways or floodplain, and usually encompass relatively large tracts of unsubdivided land that's sparsely populated. And when we look at the land use policies of the comprehensive plan, it does talk about infill, but also talks about avoiding land use decisions that create an adverse impact on adjacent neighborhoods. And so when we look at the commercial activities of the proposed zone change and the uses that could be included in that, it is not conducive to the infrastructure that's there today and the adjacent development pattern in the area. If you look at Railroad Street, this is the section of Railroad Street that fronts the street. This is between 12 and 18-foot pavement width with open ditches on each side. And these local streets are intended to carry lower volumes of traffic that service direct access to residential and neighborhood scale commercial development. They're not really intended for that heavy traffic that's typically associated with your B2 general business development. Additionally, these are just some photos that were taken of the subject property. The photo on the right is the private driveway standing at the end of Railroad Street. And then that's on the left. And on the right are just some additional photos of some of the ditches on the side of the road. You can see there's been some damage due to the large truck ruts. These are just some additional photos to give you an idea of the character of the area. In the background, on the upper right-hand corner, you can see the piles of construction material and some of the heavy freight trucks that are stored on the property. These are just some more photos. So the activity does sit pretty far back off of the street frontage. These are some photos that were taken on site. The applicant did allow us to come on to the property and take some photos of the area that's actually being used to conduct these commercial activities. So you see the building materials and you see the vehicles here. These are just some additional photos. There's just a small shop on the building, a small shop on the lot. This application was not subject to those additional courtesy notices that we described earlier because it was submitted prior to March 1st, but we did send out written notices to all the property owners within 200 feet, and we did hear back from the two property owners immediately located to the south. We received written responses, which we included in your packet. They included concerns about potential reductions in property values due to the commercial activity, and also concerns with some of the noise and dust and things that were created by the heavy freight trucks coming through that area. We did present this to the Planning and Zoning Commission. At their first meeting, they also tabled the item, and then we brought it back, and they did recommend denial of the request unanimously. Now, I will say that we've had multiple conversations and meetings with the applicant and the adjacent property owners, and I wanted to let you know that if this zone change request is denied, they are planning on coming back with a planned development application. And what that will do is it's a customized zoning district that will allow the applicant and council to get very specific as to those activities that are taking place on the property, the location of those activities, hours of operation, and the intent is to allow the applicant to phase out the development. And so staff would be recommending some sort of expiration on that development to take place to allow the property owner adequate time to relocate that business to another facility without requiring him to just shut down today and lose his employees and income and things of that nature. So again, if the zone change request is denied, the applicant will be coming back with a planned development application, and we'll be working with the property owners to make sure we impose any conditions that might mitigate those concerns that they've expressed. So just a little more information, things that we've done since the postponement from April. And the applicant is in attendance if the council would like to address them. But with that, again, staff does recommend denial of this zone change request from R1 single family to B2 general business. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and open it up for questions from the council.
Okay, I guess I'd first ask Mr. Sparks, do you have any comments?
How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah, on this zone change and on the phase out, I would like to, what kind of time framing I want to look at on the phase out, and And then being with having to redo, to redo everything, I'm still just, puzzled how, I've been here, I've actually pretty much developed this whole place. It's been there for 18 years. And when someone decides to, I don't follow their lead, it's why we're here right now. We've heard this story several times, before. As to what we're doing right now. And I really hate to phase out, and normally I know she uses the word a contractor's yard. It's not a contractor's yard. Everything I have there is what I use to develop my place with, over the years, time and time, because for me to hire someone to do it, it would cost $1 million to do that. But, I might just do it from time to time. And also they're rebuilding and reconstructing the lake as you see it, here, I think three years ago, November, that dam busted, But I like that because that lake was actually built in 1929. It's got a lot of history to it, and I love history. And so I'm glad to have a part of history. That's why I spent the money to get this thing rebuilt, And I have a lot of plans for this area, and it's going to take a lot of my equipment to keep those plans up. And I think you drove by and seen it. And I don't know if some of you guys have went by and actually seen part of it. Even in by the road, the swamp area. And my plan is I want to fill all that in. I'm really working on building and making a place for kids to be able to come and fish and hang out, without being in trouble and things like that, and the host, things like that. But if you have to phase it out, I don't see it happening, And with that, if I do, like she said, I would like to work with the other property owners and see what we can come up with to be able to do it, and without, having to phase it out, or because even as the shop and all that things, I do all my own work on everything, because if you know anything about equipment, it's pretty expensive, on that. And that's one of the reasons why I would like to keep all my stuff in-house. I've had a place away from my place, from my area there, but I wouldn't be in business today if I would have kept it, because everybody stole everything from tires to everything. They just and I just couldn't afford to do it, So that's why I have 32 acres there, and I have enough property. And as the pictures show, I'm pretty much way off the road from everything and everybody. And if I have to, if I have to put a screen up or whatever I need to do to make it happen, or whatever I need to do, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it work and to get along with everybody else, in the area.
All right. Thank you, sir. Do we have any other public comment?
Good evening. My name's Alex Thurman. I live at the property, the Lot 8 and Lot 10, on 14 acres. Excuse me. I'm the oldest of four. My father passed away 2 years ago, and we inherited this property. Jerry Thurman was my father. No, you know him, Mr. Mann. And, the ruts in the picture that were shown, anything that happens on the road, it seems like Mr. Sparks gets blamed for it. And I remember who did, Judge Fleming's father came out. They've been working on the property on 62 acres next to it. They've been bush hogging. And his father, which elderly gentleman, was jackknifed the trailer. And I was out there begging him, please don't run over my phone service, So those were I mow and maintain that since 1992. So I kind of know what happens out front. I'm a disabled veteran. I've been there every day, all day long for about 8 years. He helps me. If there's a tree that falls, the only reason I know it fell is because there's some sawdust in the road. His trucks, those guys are, I've got 8 screws, 2 rods in my back. I'm 70% service connected. I couldn't even live there if Ralph wasn't there. If Ralph leaves, we can go back to it was in the 90s. And I've had shootouts. It's documented with Nacogdoches Police Department. I mean, it was chaos. That's why I left in 2001 to move to Dallas, is because it was so bad. I still to this day have no internet in my house. I have no gas service, even though they updated it all in the neighborhood. No gas. We have no sewer service, the septic systems that we have to maintain. I can't rent my homes because of that. I have a neighbor next to me that has a landfill. You know, we've been on him for years and years to clean it up. He gets out, walks around, I've called the police on him several times. We have a fence up trying to keep him out of our yard. These are the problems that are holding us up from renting, selling, or even wanting to live there. The reason I'm still living there is because it's free and I don't really have anywhere else to go. We're at the point to where when I leave, we're just going to walk away because we can't do anything with the property, with the utilities the way that they are. So I'm in favor of the zone change because me and Mr. Sparks have been working since the early 90s developing that property. I mean, it's still forgotten. I mean, the road that you show in the picture, he's been driving his trucks on that ever since it was built. So if it was doing any damage, that road looked great to me. I drive down it. I've got, bad back. I mean, if there was bumps, I'd know about it. So, I mean, he's more help than he has hurt. I don't even notice the trucks. I mean, if there is coming and going, it might be Monday morning because they're out all week working. It's whatever. I don't know a lot about trucking, but it's not local. He's doing other stuff. So, and if I ever had any problems with Mr. Sparks, which we've maybe one or two, and it wasn't even related to him. It was the loggers that were next door to those trucks. So I just wanted to come make a statement and be clear about what's going on the Railroad Street.
Thank you. We
Yes, sir.
appreciate you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'm David Conley. I live at 2620. I'm the one who filed the complaint, although I hated to do it. But it was a result of kind of, a combination of things, but my primary problem is the noise of his belly dumpers. There's a damaged part of the street almost directly in front of my house. And when those things, and they frequently leave as early as 3:30 in the morning. And sometimes there'll be 2 or 3 leave, and it's not uncommon for like 2 or 3, and they'll be 10 or 15 minutes apart. So you'll get woken up by the first one, then maybe you're about to go back to sleep, and the next one comes by. Now, there's only one way to verify that I'm not exaggerating that. That's to get the work schedule and find out when the trucks are leaving that early in the morning. Come over and park there in front of my house, just below where that damaged part of the street, and wait for that truck to roll by. And then you can also get a good idea of how narrow that street is when that truck passes by about 1 foot from you, I'm not exaggerating. And I've spoken to Amber Thurman, and when I told her I had filed the complaint because I couldn't take the noise anymore from those belly dumpers leaving early in the morning, her comment was yes, and they leave as early as 3 o'clock in the morning. I say 3:30, she says 3, but Anyway, so Amber Thurman, who's on the record as the owner of that property, she knows what I'm talking about, and you could talk to her if you want to, and Google Sparks Trucking. You'll find that he's only been in business with the trucking since 2013. You can find at least 2 sources for that. You don't operate a trucking business on the sly under the table. He started with just 1 or 2 dump trucks, and then he gradually got more and more of these belly dumpers, and so it's a combination. Maybe they're running more frequently early in the morning. Maybe I'm just not sleeping as well in the past year or 2 because of anxiety over, the pandemic, a lunatic president inciting a riot at our Capitol. These things worry and bother me. And like I say, I enjoyed, and of course I only started walking over on Sparks' property after he bought the property he's trying to get the zone changed for. Prior to that, it was a beautiful little paradise over below the spillway and dam that had old growth, 60 or 70 years, and he cut it and put up the barbed wire fence. So, but it was a trade-off. he called me the caretaker. That was his term. And I'd, if some radio was left on or blinker left on, anything like that, I'd take care of it. I'd turn things off. On one occasion, I caught some fella, my dog alerted to something in the woods, and there's some young fellow who had heard the music over in McCrimmon Park on the weekend, and he could come from the neighborhood over on over there on Cecil Jones or whatever, and so he'd just take the direct route right through the woods.
We appreciate your comment.
Okay.
Thank you. For
Any
coming in.
questions?
Thank you, sir. Okay. Council, start with you, Mr. Anderson.
Where to start? Can you come back to me?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm still formulating thoughts.
Ms. Chafin, I remember at the last meeting, we discussed an option of going to adjacent property owners to seeing if there was some solution with that. I'm guessing that fell through.
Yes, we did visit with the Flemings, who were the property owner immediately to the east, but that route would be very long and has a lot of topographical challenges and just really is not financially feasible. And so the alternative access would be to the south through the Thurman's property, and they expressed that they were not interested in having commercial truck traffic coming through their property. And so really the alternative that we came up with was this planned development application that would tie down the specific use, location, hours of operation, impose any conditions to mitigate adverse impacts, and then potentially have a phase-out plan that would accommodate for the relocation of that business somewhere else.
I saw in the notes that Commissioner Mills was the one dissenting vote. Did he give any reasoning at the meeting, or do you have any insight on that?
He did not.
Okay. And given the surrounding zoning, is there a concern here for spot zoning?
Yes, there is. So one of the ideas of spot zoning is where you take a piece of property and you treat it differently from the surrounding property for the benefit of an individual versus the benefit of the community as a whole. So whenever we look at the zoning map, and we look at the development pattern in the area, nothing is zoned or developed as commercial, and so the zone change would be primarily benefiting the property owner at the expense of the adjacent properties, and in addition to that, just the adequate infrastructure. And so there is a potential for spot zoning. That potential may be reduced with the planned development application because of the straight zone change. You open it up to all the uses that are allowed in B2 general business. Whereas a planned development application, we can really get specific as to what those activities are, where they're located, conditions, things of that nature. So there's, I think there's less of a concern with that, but it still could be, potentially, because it is still a commercial activity, but it's not to the extent that would open it up for all the other things for B2.
But the ultimate goal with the planned development is to phase it out.
Correct, because ultimately that property in that area is just not appropriate for commercial development. And talking to Mr. Sparks, he does plan on retiring in a few years, and so, but he doesn't want to just shut down his business now. He wants to be able to make plans for either relocating or maybe reducing those commercial activities over time, or something to allow him to maintain his current income until he determines what that is. So.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really tough, just so that you know, Mr. Sparks, it's a really tough position, and certainly we appreciate the difficulty that you're in this being your livelihood. But it's tough when you're looking at all of the factors, and there were 3 property owners who spoke against it too, not just one. And so I feel like this is a very hard call. I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bolden?
You mentioned property exit in different directions other than, but that would not change the zoning, right? That's just to phase out?
As far as like the alternative access that we talked
Right,
about earlier. So, one of the issues is that whenever you have supporting facilities for a commercial business, whether it be your detention, on-site detention area, your access, all of the property that's being used to support that commercial activity must also be zoned commercial. So, for instance, if you had a commercial development and a portion of it was zoned single-family, you couldn't develop anything on that portion of the property that could be used or support a commercial use. So in this instance, if we were to try to use one of the adjacent properties either to the east or the south to provide that alternative access, those properties would also have to be
B2?
changed to a B2
Okay.
because those facilities are being used for commercial activities to support that initial
Right.
commercial use. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I understand.
Okay.
And, I mean, yeah, this is not, it's difficult, even to think about it. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bellinger?
I'm reminded of what Mr. Anderson said earlier. It's a shame to see a property used in some way before they get permission to actually use it as a business. It's very, very difficult. I think spot zoning is really something we have to be very careful not to engage in. So,
Okay.
I agree with both of you.
I formed my thoughts.
Okay.
I really appreciate your, and whoever else on staff worked on coming up with the proposed solution of the plan development. To me, that sounds like probably the best compromise, because that works toward the end goal of not having the business there, and not having the industrial traffic. Do you have a proposed timeline for that, or any timeline in mind? Because you had mentioned with the plan development that there would be a phase out built in. What timeline had you been envisioning?
So I asked the applicant to come up with a timeline that he thought would accommodate him phasing that out. I'm not as familiar with his business plans as he is. I think the applicant would probably like as long as possible. But we have not had those detailed discussions, just because it's one of those things where, based on the information that I've received so far, I think Mr. Sparks does plan on retiring in the next 10 years, and then maybe just slowly phasing out the commercial activities to where they're less intense over time, or maybe it's a shorter time frame. We haven't nailed that down yet, so I'm sorry, I don't have a.
Part of the
It would be-
application for the plan development, I assume.
Yeah, so we part of the application for the plan development. So when we brought it forward, we would be bringing all of those conditions.
Yeah.
And with the plan development district, it really is, a lot of those things are up for negotiation. And so just because we propose something doesn't mean that council has to accept that at its face value. It could be a back and forth discussion between the property owner and the adjacent property owners and council, but we'll make sure to work with those adjacent property owners too, to make sure that whatever we're proposing is going to work for them as well, to make sure that we're not, adversely affecting anyone unintentionally. So, but I don't have a specific.
No, I mean, I would like to tell Mr. Sparks, I am very in favor of supporting local businesses as much as possible, but in this instance, we're dealing with a situation in which a business has effectively been operated in violation of zoning ordinances, and I'm also very against, in general, spot zoning, especially a very isolated island spot zoning. So to me, the plan development option seems probably the best route. That way we're not putting a hard and fast cutoff, but we are moving things in the direction that the landowners who complained would like it to go, and we're not creating an island of zoning in there that could come back to bite us in the future.
Okay, so I'm assuming we would look for a motion to approve or a motion to deny, D. Do I
Well,
have one of those?
I would move that we deny the application with agenda item D, 7D.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second, Ms. Miller. Any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Okay, so at this time, we will go to executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code number 5.
You okay with how low that sits? Okay.
Oh, okay. Okay, pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071, we are returning from executive session at
Clock, reader. 7:15.
7:15. And we're adjourned.